Okay, welcome to this webinar for it's titled Funding Your Zero Waste.
Bienvenidos a este webinario que se llama Financiamiento de la Basura Cero.
Just a moment, my computer crashed. Anyway, just a second.
Un segundito que tengo un problemita técnico aquí.
Yeah, just give me maybe a minute. Anyway, so while waiting, so this is the webinar organized by GAIA as part of our global webinar series.
Este webinario está organizado por GAIA como parte de una serie mundial de webinarios.
And we have some just a few reminders for our participants. So
Y
this
tenemos un
webinar,
par de recordatorios para nuestros participantes.
yeah, so then in the screen, you'll see there's some reminders about interpretation. So there's a interpretation icon with a globe. You can click that so you can access interpretation features for both English and Spanish languages.
Dentro de unos minutitos vamos a activar la función de interpretación del Zoom. Si se conectan por computadora, pueden hacer clic en el mundito, en el globo terráqueo que les aparece en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Si se conectan por un teléfono, un iPhone, un iPad, tienen que buscar los 3 puntos en la parte superior derecha, hacer clic allí, elegir la función de interpretación, sea inglés o español, y si entienden ambos idiomas, pueden dejar la función de interpretación en off.
And for those using their phones, either iPhone or Android, in the app you can click the icon with the 3 dots to see the interpretation icon.
Ok, eso es lo que acabamos de decir en español, que pueden encontrar el icono en la parte inferior de la pantalla o en los 3 puntos en la parte superior en caso de un iPhone o un iPad.
And maybe in between the presentations, I'll also give some reminders, at least for those who are coming in later into this webinar. And just a few reminders for the participants or the attendees to keep your microphones muted. And if you have questions for this webinar or for our panelists, you can use the Q&A button to type in your questions. Okay, so for this evening or for this afternoon or for this morning, it's quite a refreshing webinar. We have different panelists coming from different regions. First, we have Rocha of Nipe Fagio, based in Tanzania. We also have Lina Razeto Olivares from GeoCiclos, based in Chile. And also we have Satyarupa Shekhar from Break Free from Plastic Asia Pacific, based in Chennai, India. So this webinar is actually an accompaniment of the fact sheet that we will release on our website. The fact sheet is called Funding Your Zero Waste Municipality, 3 Steps to Success. And hopefully this will provide GAIA members with the know-how to assess and access funds to implement a zero waste system. We will also share some success stories of local organizations working on zero waste implementation in different regions. And this webinar will last 1.5 hours. First, I'll give an overview about the fact sheet and share the experience of the Philippines in implementing zero waste. And then I'll give the floor to my co-panelists who will provide some insights based on their country's experiences. If you have some technical issues in using Zoom, you may use the chat box to get in touch with my colleagues, Cecilia and Trish, to maybe help you out in how to navigate this app. Okay, so yeah, and I'll start off with this presentation about funding zero waste in your municipality. And first, just to give you a nutshell on about zero waste cities, I posted here 6 elements that in a way characterize our zero waste practices or work in not just in the Philippines, but basically in everywhere you go in across our regions. And first, zero waste tend to favor decentralized systems as much as possible. We could try to collect waste close or at source to increase recovery rates. Second, we provide support to policy measures aimed at improving waste management and reducing single-use plastic. So one example, for example, in the Philippines or in India, you have national laws that, oh yeah, just a moment. Yeah, okay, so hopefully that helps. Okay, so for the next one is you have mandatory regulations, mandatory sorting measures that are in place to, in a way, encourage or require households and other waste generators to sort their waste at source. And we also see in these examples or in these practices that people and communities are participate actively. So they are part of multi-sector committees. They're part of decision-making processes. They're part of preparing designs on preparing designs for collection routes or even providing feedback for our cities. Number 4 is we also look at the livelihood opportunities that are available for waste pickers and waste workers. So in a way that they have that opportunity to not just earn money, but also become part of the decision-making process of these zero waste systems. Number 5, zero waste cities or zero waste models are cost efficient. You'll see later how this translates into savings for cities where they can, in a way, allocate these savings or unused resources to other social services. And lastly, these models, ideally, they're against incinerators and waste to energy technologies. To, of course, these types of methods discourage cities to actually pursue reduction or recycling measures that will impact or harm waste workers and pickers. And the next, for the first step or the 3 steps, I'll go through these 3 steps and later provide an example about the Philippine case. First, step one is assessing the cost. It answers the question, how much will zero waste cost to enact in a particular community or a city. Zero waste, after all, it's while it is cost effective, it doesn't necessarily give you, it's not for free. So, I mean, you still need to pay for infrastructure, you need to pay collectors, you need to pay for education programs to make these programs work. Number two is to look for financial resources, answering the question on who is funding the waste management in your municipality. And a lot of cities are, in a way, using their own resources, either through taxes, business revenues, or permits. You also see schemes for EPR, and others maybe start off with philanthropic funding and so on. And number three is addressing gaps and issues. So in some cases, when you try to compare costs in terms of doing zero waste and sticking with the status quo, then you might see, well, the status quo, or actually just collecting waste, regardless if it's sorted, it's actually less expensive or cheaper compared to what you're proposing, going zero waste. But if we take a closer look, then we might see some gaps there. Maybe this city is not considering or not collecting all the waste that's generated by its citizens. Okay, so first, the first step is to assess the cost, and you'll see actually two components for this. First is the startup or capital cost. So these are mostly the infrastructure or the purchase of vehicles, land for building your own MRFs or recycling facilities. And then you also have your operational costs. So these are the expenses that you will incur, or the city will incur, usually annually. And this involves salaries, running information and education campaigns, and of course, doing those periodic maintenance for the infrastructure, MRF, or some collection vehicles. Over time, this infrastructure or assets would need some repairs or some improvements to at least prolong their use. For this step, of course, the important is to look at comparing the cost of doing zero waste and doing the status quo. And in this case, sometimes you'll see a proposal, for example, from a provider or technology provider that's offering waste to energy. And it's good that you try to compare the cost of these proposals, or the status quo, for example, and the proposed zero waste program that in a way members or we're offering to cities and communities. Second is, of course, looking at the possibility of or the potential of looking at existing examples in other regions or in other countries. And you'll see, for example, in the Philippines, for example, the city of San Fernando was able to reduce their waste management cost to just $700,000 US. And prior to doing zero waste, they were spending about $1.4 million in terms of just bringing all the waste in this landfill a few provinces away from their place. You'll see a lot of examples online, and of course in our microsite zerowasteworld.org. There's also an example, for example, in Parma in Italy, where we see a overall reduction in terms of waste management costs. So they were able to reduce it to about 450,000 euros, around 500,000, after introducing a zero waste system. And that would actually just cost them around $201 US per household per year, compared to the national average, which is 276,000 per house, 276 US dollars rather per household. At the same time, this cost comparison would provide us with a tool to actually advocate a zero waste transition for our municipality or cities. After all, even though we can try to promote the benefits of doing zero waste by showing some facts or figures about health, environment, for a lot of cities, the economic benefits would be, I guess, the most appealing for them, because that would create savings for their local governments. The second is to look at financial resources. So we've in the fact sheet, we've listed down some of these options. And the first question that we'd like to answer here is, does the city already pay for waste management? And a lot of cities, actually, according to World Bank, there are actually cities that spend as much as 20% of their annual budgets. And that's very costly for local governments. And sometimes with cash trap for resources, we see governments or cities that look for other sources to, in a way, cut corners. So you'll see some cities that, in a way, just collect waste that's in the downtown area or in the city center, while avoiding the peripheries. The cost of doing waste management, you'll see if you put it in a cost breakdown, a lot of the cost, especially the one-time ones, would be invested in landfills or incinerators, and of course would cost a lot of money. We're also looking at grants or philanthropic funding to also provide that support for cities. And of course, maybe one example would be the Plastic Solutions Fund for a lot of cities, especially in the Global South. Also, of late, they're getting some grants in terms to start up their own pilot zero waste projects. And this type of funding, in a way, encourages cities to, in a way, try out zero waste by introducing it in a small portion of a municipality or city. But of course, this would work as a pilot program. But if we'd like to see to make this sustainable, of course, it's important to look for other schemes to sustain the funding by looking at other sources to continue the work, or at least amplify the implementation of zero waste systems. Other options is some cities also look into offering bonds to help finance projects. Bonds will be, I guess, important for a lot of cities um, to fund big time infrastructure projects. And I guess the drawback for bonds, for example, in the U.S., um, this would actually cost around at least $10 million. So it would require maybe cities that are in a way large enough to in a way repay this funding that we can get from either private sector or from its citizens. I guess the for cities in the global south, it's quite rare for cities to actually look at bonds to fund their own zero waste projects, but it might need additional resources or markets that in a way more mature to explore this option. On other options, we also have EPR, or extended producer responsibility, where cities or municipalities can require um, companies or businesses or bulk generators to um, pay additional taxes for the waste that they're generating, and in turn, using this additional revenue can subsidize the work for starting zero waste programs. Another example is doing partnerships with the private sector, and you also look at some examples of these are maybe banks that can, or development agencies that can maybe do some cluster of work to fund these projects. One example would be um, uh, the GIZ, the German Development Agency, that can, in a way, offer this financing schemes to a national government. The national government, in turn, can offer this to a cluster of local governments who can afford loans. Aside from development agencies, there's also the option of looking at international finance. You can look at there are schemes available for the World Bank or ADB, but like the private sector, you would this schemes would require large amounts of funding, which might be too much for a city. So this will entail additional support from the national government to create this opportunity to actually cluster cities or municipalities or even provinces to group themselves together and secure these financing options. Number three, or the last step, is to address the gaps in issues. So as I've mentioned earlier, the question is, what if my city's waste management system is more affordable than zero waste? Then in most cases, you will see some of the cutting corners or the activities that cities might do to, in a way, save money. And that includes dumping waste in open dump sites, or refusing to pay waste workers living wages, or creating unfavorable subsidies, and so on. And this low cost would actually bring additional expenses for the city, and long or everywhere in a neighborhood or in several districts, then that would, in a way, create some opportunities to worsen flooding in the area. There are also other negative impacts such as increased healthcare costs, violations on labor rights, and so on. And the idea here is we want to include all of these externalities so we can show local governments and cities that zero waste system tries to create a more holistic approach or perspective in terms of doing waste management or resource management. Second question is, what if my city doesn't have enough budget for waste management? And as I've mentioned earlier, a lot of cities, if we are to improve waste management, we'll see some cities or municipalities that might need to spend a fifth of their local budgets or their annual budgets just to fulfill this public service. And I think there are also opportunities where we can look at funding options to actually jumpstart the work. So you have the funding options that are mentioned earlier. It doesn't have to start with the doing self-funding options. You can start off with grants, or maybe look at options with your national government or multilateral financial institutions. Okay, so other than this, there are other, you can look at the fact sheet for more information about doing or focusing on waste financing. So there's some information from C40, from ECLE, etc. to if you're more interested to look into this. So I'll move towards the case about San Fernando, Philippines. So just to give you a background about this city. So we've featured this city a number of times. This city in the Philippines partnered with a member, Mother Earth Foundation, to increase its waste diversion rate from 12% in 2012 to about 82% in 2019. And you'll see in the screen some of the notable milestones from this city. And they're actually targeting a 91% diversion rate in 2025. And just to show you how it was able to improve on its waste management by introducing a zero waste system. So back in 2011, 2012, the waste management is really based on a collect and dump system, where just collect everything, all the mixed waste, and then put it in a landfill. And in 2019, they partnered with Mother Earth Foundation, and that's the time they were able to adopt or introduce a zero waste program. And because of that, they were able to not just increase their recycling rate, but also reduce the collection spending from 1.4 million to around 700,000 US dollars. And just to show you some numbers from this case. So as I've mentioned earlier, in step one, it's important to look at the cost that's involved in this zero waste system. We're looking at startup and operating costs. For startup, the city spent about 41,000 US dollars. They used it for land acquisition, for MRF construction, to buy trucks, or in a lot of cases, you don't have to actually purchase big trucks. You can, if you're using a decentralized system, then you can maybe work on smaller vehicles like push carts and tri-bikes, depending on the available resources. This funding or this money was also used for collection bins, as well as supporting a IEC, or Information Education and Communication program. The startup cost doesn't include landfill because the city already has a landfill that's provided by a private company. So this is only the breakdown for this particular model. For the operating costs, it spends around 14,000 US dollars per year, and that goes to the salaries of collectors, the operation of the MRFs, and of course the continuing education campaigns, not just for households but other waste generators. And if you were to at least compute it, that would be around $7 US dollars as operational cost per ton. And just to maybe a disclaimer, the salaries of collectors here, it's around 3,000 pesos. So that's around, let me see, that's around 60 US dollars. So maybe in other municipalities, or even in the case of the Philippines, that might not be enough. So you also have to consider increasing or looking at how much the city can provide, at least to improve the living economic conditions of their collectors. Second is to, in the Philippines, in this case, a lot of cities rely on what we call the internal revenue allotment. So these are the, or IRA. So this is comes from the taxes that is collected by the national government, and annually this is distributed to local governments, to cities and municipalities based on your population. Cities also rely on business taxes, and in some cases, although very rare, is to issue bonds. As I mentioned earlier, bonds will be in a way beneficial if the city has enough resources to repay this type of funding. There are also grants available for doing pilot models, but as I mentioned earlier, this is good if you're planning to start off with a project. One example would be in a city called Tacloban. So we were able to access grant funding from the U.S. State Department to at least support the work about a third of the cities, barangays or villages. And after seeing the outcome or the impact of this pilot project, the city decided, why not use my own resources 2 years from now, then I can fund my own zero waste system by introducing it to the remainder of the city. Other examples or options for in the Philippines, there's also funding coming from the national government. In this case, we have the Development Bank of the Philippines and the Municipal Development Fund Office under the Department of Budget and Management. So these schemes, in a way, offer low interest loans to local governments. But the current portfolio right now, if you're interested looking at this, a lot of cities are using this to finance high-cost infrastructure projects such as landfills or purchasing big trucks, garbage trucks. And maybe in the future, there will be an opportunity to create a more holistic project that would include resources for more collectors and decentralized collection. Another example is international funding. So looking at the possibility of funding LGU clusters or local government clusters to national banks. National banks can, of course, approach IFIs such as World Bank or ADB to access loans or grants for funding, and then spread out or distribute these loans to several LGUs to fund their own systems. In the Philippines, last, I guess my last slide would be this step. It's actually encouraging that we're seeing a lot of cities that are in a way lining up to members such as Mother Earth Foundation and Eco Waste, but we can in a way only fund a small fraction of cities because this funding, of course, is available through grants, and they're very limited. But it's encouraging to note that a lot of cities realize that there's benefit into doing zero waste in their own localities. Under banks and IFIs, so there's also an opportunity to maximize opportunities such as the Development Bank of the Philippines Green Fund Financing Program, and maybe GIZ's Fund for Waste Management. And of course, this would require a lot of commitment coming from the national government to support municipalities. And then some exploratory discussions about having a zero waste transition fund. So this has been an idea by some folks from GAIA about why not pool resources to create a zero waste transition fund, looking for impact investors who can, in a way, pool resources to help local governments, municipalities to transition to zero waste. And yeah, if you need more information about this, I'll flash the link of the fact sheet where you can download it from our website. So that's it on my end. I'll turn you over to our next presenter. For our next presenter, we'll have Shekhar to provide some information about her insights about India. So Satyarupa is the Asia Pacific coordinator of Break Free from Plastic, and she's based in Chennai, India. And prior to that, she's the director of urban governance at the Citizen, Consumer, and Civic Action Group. And she holds graduate degrees in law and economics from University of Rotterdam and University of Hyderabad. Before I pass on the floor to Satyarupa, just a reminder for those coming in, if in your screen you'll see a interpretation button with the globe. You can click on that if you need support for English and Spanish translations. So for those using mobile phones to access this webinar, you can click on the three red dots to see the interpretation features. And of course, we have our interpreters on hand. We have Yvonne and Lucille to also help you with the language assistance. So I'll turn over you to Satyarupa.
Thanks, Miko. Hello, everyone. I'm Satyarupa Shekhar, and I have recently joined the Break Free from Plastic movement as the new coordinator for the Asia Pacific region. Prior to this, as Miko said, I used to work with the Citizen, Consumer, and Civic Action Group, which is a policy group in Chennai, in India. And I would like to share a little bit of my experience in working with the city government when we help them design and develop a zero waste initiative. It was only for a year that we had worked with them directly, which was last year. And it was really to set up their transition from their current centralized system to a decentralized waste recovery program. So Chennai, just to give a very short background to people who aren't aware, it's the fourth largest metropolitan city in India. It has a population of approximately 8 million and spans a geography of approximately 400 square kilometers. So Miko has already talked a little bit about the 3 steps to success for setting up a zero waste system. And how does one really go about it in a country like India, for example, where we have municipal governments that are responsible primarily for waste management systems. So traditionally, of course, we have centralized systems, which mean that it is based on collect and dispose. And the disposal is usually in designated sites as open dump sites.
Satyarupa, is it okay if you can speak a bit louder or put your mic near you? Thank you.
Sure. Is this better? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So traditionally, we have used open dump sites, designated sites where the city transfers its waste. As in many other cities, we have Chennai has repeatedly run out of space for where this waste can be dumped, and a lot of the waste finds its way into rivers. Chennai has 3 large rivers, and it immediately reaches the sea. So the source of funds that we had available for Chennai and for many municipal governments across India primarily come from the city budgets, which mean the revenue, its own city revenue, but also from grants that the city receives from federal and state governments. There are also several special programs that cities are engaged with. So there is something called the Swachh Bharat Mission or the Clean India program. There's a Smart Cities mission. And over the past decade or so, we have seen several smaller programs which have, making a pedestrian plaza or city beautification or river restoration, all of which have solid waste management components in them. Chennai specifically has reached out to receive funds through either direct projects or grants and also aid. And it's not just that the city government is the only actor, but we have a lot of NGOs that also work directly with the city government and also directly with the communities to manage their waste better. One key source has obviously been from donors and funding agencies, but more recently in India, a law mandates companies to give a share of their post-tax profits for for social development. And waste is one of the areas in which companies can support NGOs. Also, the government, of course, takes institutional loans from financial institutions such as GAIA, which is Japanese, KfW, which is German. There's the World Bank, ADB, AIIB. There are various international financial institutions that support directly waste management or indirectly through other infrastructure projects. Also, Chennai being a capital is host to several consulates. We don't have any embassies. All the embassies are located in New Delhi, but various embassies and consulates also engage with the cities that they're based in and with the residents and NGOs to support various programs. So we do see that there are some local startups that have been engaging with these consulates to receive some finance. And of course, there are community-owned and community-led initiatives. There are some communities and some cities that are trying the user fee model. Those are few and far between, but this is a source of funds that NGOs that you all are associated with could consider if you all were looking for funding for zero waste programs. Of course, Miko has already gone into how does one really estimate costs for both a centralized and a decentralized zero waste system. One place where we can look for this information is obviously city budgets. The other is in public procurement documents, tenders and contracts, and also proposals and approved budgets for special programs like pedestrian plaza or city beautification. And it's very important to find the necessary information, which can be sometimes very technical. And here it would be very important for you all to consider working with allies, partners who can help you, sort of demystify budget documents. Not all NGOs have the capacity to understand these complicated and very complex budget documents. In Chennai, for example, these are available as PDF documents, so it's very difficult for us to scrape and do year-on-year analysis of how much the city is spending on solid waste management. Often we found that the descriptions, the line items tend to change. And so I think it's always good to reach out to people who can support the analysis. And once you have some of this data, it would be very good to compare what the current centralized system, which is based on collect and dispose, with a potential decentralized and zero waste system would look like. And this is very important because we need to establish zero waste as a credible approach to managing waste. And it's important that we consider not just the financial costs, but the real costs of the current system versus what a zero waste approach can bring. So it's not only savings in terms of the operations and infrastructure. It is very important that we can also present to donors, to the city government, to other actors who can actually be allies and form alliances with, around the other costs and potential benefits that can come from emissions associated with transportation, incineration, and open burning, costs that are borne in terms of public health by our damage to our water, soil, and air, leakages of water, waste into our water sources. So for example, in Chennai, it was very easy for us to make a case for segregated waste collection to prevent waste from entering into our stormwater drains, because Chennai is a coastal city and it's very flat. And when waste enters our stormwater drains, it has caused a lot of blockages. And when we have rains, the city floods, right? So when the city floods, then it's very obvious to see that there's a lot of waste that's actually blocking drainage. So this is a cost that typically does not get counted as a waste management cost, but it's very important, and it makes a very strong case with the city officials to actually draw these parallel connections with the other issues that the city government is responsible for. And it's also very useful to actually present the benefits that accrue from moving to a zero waste system. So, not just savings, not just prevention in terms of, emissions, but also discarded materials that find another life. And this is very important that it is completely integrated into the waste management system that you would propose, wherein you can calculate some of the revenues from compost or from materials sold to recyclers, etc. And in doing this, one would usually look to approach solid waste management departments and officials, but there are also other departments that may be equally important in connecting with. In Chennai, we engaged with the public health department because waste was being associated with water stagnation, mosquito breeding, dengue, chikungunya, and all of these other public health hazards. Of course, we also had the opportunity to make a big case for climate action in terms of, preventing or mitigating emissions, because even in just as in open dumping in under ambient conditions, plastic also releases a lot of methane, and of course, there's green waste that releases methane if it's not managed properly. You could also connect with communities. So what we did in Chennai was to actually connect with farmers, urban gardeners, and recyclers who were very, very keen to take segregated waste and compost. And a lot of urban gardeners were actually even willing to pay for the compost. How this came about was obviously that the city government actually had to be made aware of a lot of the work that we did, and GAIA had actually supported Citizen Action Group to undertake several pilots and demonstration projects. And this was very important to not just for the city government to know, but also for us as an NGO that was executing such a project to understand what could be some of the practical challenges in actually executing a transition from a centralized to a decentralized waste management system. And this was also very important for us because it made us confront or account for a lot of the intracity differences. You know, neighborhoods that are congested or neighborhoods that are particularly wealthy and do not want to segregate. All of these practical challenges were very, very important for us. And going through pilots and demonstration projects helped us actually understand what are some of the practical challenges in such a transition. And of course, transition time to zero waste means that we would have to actually account for us to have to unlearn a lot of what we know about waste management before we can actually learn and adapt to a zero waste system. I would just like to end my presentation on some pro tips, you know, things that we did that worked. One was, of course, have very, very strong allies to support such a move. And our primary allies were the city residents, because they are really well placed to actually understand what it means for their own health and for savings in terms of tax revenues. Of course, and a very strong ally was also waste workers and informal waste sector workers and unions, other livelihood-based groups. Unfortunately, we were not able to engage with them as closely as we wanted to, but this is because of the challenges that they themselves face in terms of informal contracts. City governments usually engaging in hire and fire, they have a very weak bargaining position. Alliances that we actually relied on were environmental protection groups, consumer groups, actually very well placed to make a very strong case for a zero waste system, because they also can talk about food safety, about labeling, the dangers of using plastic, and of course, medical professionals. And I think lastly, I think we should, it's all very exciting to move to a zero waste system, but I think there are a few cautionary points, which is that we are invariably challenged by the short-term and false solutions that city governments are exposed to. So we do have a lot of technology-based companies or waste management companies that approach city governments and want to sell technology like incineration. In India now we have this big thing around 24-hour composting, which is basically an incinerator, but this is installed in our own homes. So not just are we exposed to toxic fumes, but people get massive energy bills. And these are very important for us to be aware of, because once the city gets involved in such solutions, they go on this path dependence, right? It's very difficult for us to actually turn this around. And I think in doing all of this, I think we should just be aware that there are certain trade-offs that we make in moving from a centralized system to a decentralized system. And a lot of this is actually, the brunt of this is borne by marginalized communities. And so we should definitely take care not to further disenfranchise them and further displace them. Yes, so this is all from me, but I'm happy to connect with everybody on this email. Thank you.
Thanks, Satyarupa, for that insightful sharing about India. Later on, if you have questions, please use the Q&A to address some questions for Satyarupa and other panelists. Up next, to share insights about experiences in Chile, allow me to introduce our next speaker. Just a reminder for the participants, our next speaker, Lina Razeto Olivares, will deliver her presentation in Spanish. So I'd advise everyone to use the interpretation button, and if you're more comfortable using the English language, then please switch to the English language. And then for the others, for Spanish speaking participants, you can stay here on this channel. Lina is the co-founder as well as the general and commercial manager of GeoCiclos. It's a technical support provider. It's a company that specializes in project design, implementing, and management in environmental and agri-industrial sectors. Lina has over 17 years of experience in this field, and she has also 12 years experience in designing municipal solid waste systems, implementing waste prevention and environmental education systems in Chile. As part of GeoCiclos, Lina has helped some of the most progressive waste management systems in Chile based on a zero waste approach, focusing on prevention, household and community composting, and community participation. And yes, the floor is yours, Lina.
You are on mute, Lina.
Ok, gracias. Buenos días o buenas noches o buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Lina Razeto, le corrijo a Miko, gracias por esa presentación. Y agradezco la invitación de la organización Zero Waste, de GAIA, a través también de su representante en Chile, Magdalena Donoso, con quien hemos colaborado. GAIA es una institución que nosotros admiramos, el trabajo que realizan a nivel internacional, nos gusta colaborar con los principios y los valores que ellos transmiten, ¿cierto? Y bueno, es también el trabajo que nosotros hacemos acá en Chile, a través de nuestra empresa GeoCiclos. Nuestra misión es precisamente crear conciencia ambiental en los ciudadanos, en la gente acá en Chile, para la construcción de una sociedad ambientalmente sustentable o sostenible. Somos una empresa que lleva 14 años trabajando en
For 14 years on environmental projects. We started at the very beginning with organic waste. As from 2013, we partnered with an Italian company, Sartori Ambiente, and from there onwards, we have strongly promoted differentiated collection in our country. And we are very pleased to see that these projects at a very incipient stage when we started working, nowadays are more widespread. There's more interest in them. There are more municipalities that are joining this zero waste initiative in the quest for more environmentally friendly solutions, more sustainable solutions for managing waste. Currently, we are implementing several projects at the national level. We are working from Arica down to Punta Arenas. Arica is in the north, Punta Arenas is way down south. And today we'd like to show you two projects that have been very important in our history, in our work, and that have inspired other municipalities in our country. We propose within the projects that we implement, three main kinds of solutions. We know that the solutions are not equal for all cities. In Chile, there's a great diversity. We have a desert in the north, in the south. We have forests, rainforests, very cold climate. We have isolated areas to islands. We have glaciers to areas with a lot of snow, mountains, coastal areas. So solutions are not equal across the country, but the principles on which we base our solutions are similar. And which are these now? Mainly composting programs in households, community composting too. We've also developed that kind of project, and municipal composting by collecting organic waste. Composting, one of the programs we like the most because the average of organic waste generated at the national level is 58% over the total waste generated. So we have a lot of organic waste that nowadays go to the landfills or to the dumps. And through composting programs, you can reduce waste by 50%. We provide equipment, which are these composters, as well as environmental training and monitoring the projects that we implement. We also propose vermicomposting projects, which are more indoor systems. You can use them in very small spaces like balconies, for instance, and within the households too, one could recycle organic matter through these systems. They allow to recycle them using the waste using worms. And then we have differentiated waste collection programs. For us, this is the best solution. It's a solution that can be implemented at a municipal level for the whole of the municipality, notwithstanding the fact that household composting is the best, no doubt, because you recycle waste at home and it doesn't have to be managed from our doorstep outwards. And these differentiated waste collection programs, we've implemented two in Chile, one in the Futelaufu municipality. GAIA carried out a case study there, and we were able to reach a 50% reduction in waste in this small municipality of 3,000 inhabitants approximately. And the most recent one is one in Santa Juana, which I will talk about today. It was implemented in a municipality that's a little larger, 14,000 inhabitants, and currently they have reduced between 30 and 40% of waste. These programs we have implemented have been successful, no doubt. I'm going to show you the Santa Juana program now. They've been successful because citizens have included the habit of separating waste at home. This does not take place overnight. These are processes. We've also carried out environmental education plans at schools and through neighborhood organizations, also through the municipalities. As Miko said, we carry out training for municipal officials, waste collectors. It's training for the whole of the municipality to bring about a general change in how waste is managed. And that is how this program was implemented for 7 months, education program, to then deliver to each of the homes a set of containers where you had recyclables in the red, paper and cardboards in the blue container, and organic waste went into this ventilated community with a compostable bag in it. This was then left out on the sidewalk for collection purposes. And they were collected in these green containers with 20 liters capacity. In Santa Juana, at the beginning, many years ago, they disposed of their waste in a dump, a hole very near the city. It was very cheap. They spent practically nothing, but they had no environmental measure in place. This was closed because of health and environmental problems, and the community then used a landfill. You can see it here on the screen. It was 70 kilometers away from the city, and the collection truck had to travel every day, but did so before for over an hour with waste in a way that wasn't too environmentally friendly, I must say. So the municipality thus made a decision of changing waste management, particularly for economic reasons, for saving on transport costs. Transport costs have a great incidence on waste management costs. So they planned to implement this change towards a differentiated collection model. This didn't happen overnight. It took time. The idea came up back in 2010, 2012, until 2018 when it was finally implemented. So in the city, there's a differentiated collection schedule. Currently, 2 trips a week are made to the landfill. Organic waste is treated at a composting plant, and smaller trucks are used for collecting this organic waste. The objective is to achieve a 66% recycling rate. This is the composting plant that is operational nowadays. The organic waste is collected separately, and there's 35% less organic waste and 46% less recyclable waste, and the per capita production of waste has come down by 25%. As to costs, we have saved 43% on fuel and maintenance expenses, and this is also included in the waste elimination or disposal amounts. The Santa Juana community is located in the south of the country. It's a rural community, and it's the other one is urban, with over 200,000 inhabitants, Providencia. And here we have implemented a household composting and vermicomposting program that has to date benefited 1,700 families or more. This is very interesting because it has been implemented for the last 5 years. It started with a 60% of organic waste. We went to households and were able to demonstrate that 60% of the organic waste could be, that was plant or vegetable waste and could be composted. And at the end of the program, we have carried out a characterization exercise, and now we see that 50% of organic waste is recycled, but the people participating in this program not only recycle organic matter. In their waste, they've realized there are other elements that can be recycled. That is how they've started separating plastics, paper, cardboard. And this is one of my last slides. This was the last study in 2018. There's been a 74% drop. In 2013, we carried out a study on how much waste each person and household generated in the community, and it was determined that it was 1.5 kilograms per day. And when we started implementing the composting program, this has progressively decreased. And in 2019, we went down to 390 grams. That's an incredible reduction that has its origin in the recycling. So in Chile, there are 4 ways to fund this kind of projects. The first is with central government funding. Each municipality proposes a project to the central government and can obtain funding for composting programs, recycling programs, or to build landfills or other kinds of solutions, maybe not that close to zero waste. There's also regional funding, that is, the regional governments also have financing for this kind of program. The Santa Juana program was funded using these funds. It was a mix between state financing at the central level and financing from regional governments. The third is financing at the municipal level. The Providencia programs were done with municipal financing. They determined that they could achieve a reduction in their management costs through composting and vermicomposting at home. And then there are also other funds that one can apply to, but for only very small pilot projects. We are currently working with lots of municipalities, and we have been able to show that there's a real impact on reducing waste generated in the municipality. The amount of waste diminishes, and also there is less cost attached to waste management in these communities in which projects of this kind are implemented for 3,000 or 5,000 households. And this has other environmental and economic benefits that were already mentioned in previous presentations. That is to bring down greenhouse gas emissions, which is quantifiable too, and we render advice to the municipalities in this. And of course, the benefits of composting as such, applying it to degraded soil and in the sequestration of carbon equivalent. That's my presentation. I thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope this has been a contribution to...
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Lina, for that sharing. So just to remind everyone that our next presenter will be doing the presentation in English. So if we can do the switch. For our next panelist, we have Anna Rocha, who will talk about the prospects of doing zero waste in Tanzania. So Anna is of course, a Brazilian, has a graduate degree in business, focusing on business strategy for sustainability and marketing. She's been living in Tanzania since 2010. She's the executive director of Nipe Fagio, with over 15 years of experience in doing community engagement. And currently, her organization has been implementing a zero waste in a pilot community in East Africa. So, Anna, please go ahead.
Thank you, Miko. Let me share my screen right here. Let me. Do you see it full screen? I hope so. Okay. So I'd like to talk a little bit about our example here in Tanzania. We have started piloting a zero waste model in 2019, so it's recently. And it's a very interesting, it's a community-based zero waste model here in Dar es Salaam. It's inspired by the model that is going on in the Philippines. That is a great benchmark, I think, for anyone that would like to learn about this. Let me just see if I can do, as I see that it's not, maybe like this. No. Here we go. I think this is better. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can, some tools that you can use to persuade the government, some tools to persuade donors, and others to persuading everyone, estimating costs, and then funding opportunities, and then final tips, starting with persuading the government. One of the things, and I'm talking about this based on our experience here in Tanzania, so it may be different in different places, in different locations, but I think that this one may apply to a lot of people here. So about persuading the government, there are a couple things that we have done to persuade our government, including collecting and showing data. One of the things about waste, at least here in Tanzania, especially when you think about plastic pollution, is that there is not that much data available. So we can see waste everywhere, but no one can quantify that waste. So one way to work on persuading the government is thinking about collecting and showing data, and I'm going to show examples soon about how to do that. Prove that it's cost effective. So is it a better alternative and a cheaper alternative than the alternatives in place, in case there are alternatives in place, because in many places, like in Dar es Salaam, for example, many neighborhoods have no waste collection. Align with employment opportunities, economy, and health. Normally governments have, they pay more attention to employment opportunities, economy, and health than they pay attention to waste. And so one of the great things about zero waste model is that it touches all those three things. And if you can make your case around that, I think you can probably be more successful when persuading the government. Release the government burden. In a country like Tanzania, in a city like Dar es Salaam, the government does not have the capacity to handle waste management. So when you go there and say, okay, I can do this for you, is normally also a good alternative. And then connect it to women and youth movements, something else that the government really, really cares about. So a couple examples about that. So one of the things that we do in terms of data is actually mapping. So we need to show how the waste situation is in the country. And so we do a lot of mapping to be able to do that. With that mapping, and this is one example that you can see here, we have drones mapping several rivers here in Tanzania in partnership with Ramani Huria, which is another organization that can do the drone mapping. So we have identified over 2,000 waste spots, and we went there and validated, and we found out we aligned some data around that. So 67% of the communities have no alternative for disposal. There is land reclamation. So we went and talked to people and turned that into data that the government would care about. Another way, another mapping that we have done, another way to think about basically showing information that can help persuading the government is we did this mapping, which is basically this dot that you can see. The Pugo dump site is the only official dump site. We have no landfills in Dar es Salaam. We only have a dump site, and that's the official dump site. So this is a mapping of how long it takes and the costs involved into transporting the waste from different areas of Dar es Salaam to the Pugo dump site. So the red, the greener it is, the cheaper it is to take the waste to Pugo, and then the more it gets red, then it's worse and more less cost effective. So that's another way for you to show the government, you see the system that is in place right now doesn't work. We need to decentralize the system in order to be able to do that. Another data that we have used, and we went actually and we researched all the official statistics that the government has published. In our case, in the Tanzania National Bureau of Statistics about waste. And so the data is actually a little bit out of date, but it still gives us some idea about, okay, what is the volume of waste that is out there? What is the population? What is the percentage of collection? And we highlight, because several times, even within the municipality officials do not have access or do not remember the official data that is out there. So then we get numbers that say, for example, that less than 40% of the households have access to waste collection services, or that about 70% of people in Dar es Salaam live in unplanned or underserviced areas. So all of this helps you building your case, and it shows that you are actually working with government on building that case. We also do loss of waste and branch audits. So we can also show what is the kind of waste that is out there. When you think about waste, and all this is from now to 2020, from the old update that we did here, you can see what is the composition of the waste, what can be recycled, what cannot be recycled. So what is the volume of waste that you can find in the environment, and how important it is to create a system to prevent that from happening, from being in the environment. And we always say, do the most with your data. So whatever you do, like do the most. We have graphs of recyclables, for residual waste. We have graphs for the brands collected. We also have for the producers, as you can see, showing who are the main producers, where the waste is coming from. So that also helps a little bit with showing that we have a systemic problem. It's not just about people not disposing the waste properly. It's also about the production, and it's about the lack of infrastructure related to all of that. So always make the most of your data. That's what I would say. And then when you think about persuading donors, at least from our experiences, sometimes it's not easy for donors to actually relate to the reality on the ground. So you can make it relatable. You need to go there and think about how you can show and convince that donor and show some of your reality to the donor. So in a way that the donor can see and think, okay, maybe I have never been there, but I can understand a little bit about the situation. Another important portion for persuading donors is showing your sustainability plan. Normally donors will ask, okay, what makes you think that this, if you actually implement this project, this is going to stand on its own legs after a couple of years? So it's important for you to show to show how you feel about that, or at least what is your plan for that. And then align social and environmental outcomes. Donors also care about people. So if you talk about environment in relation to people, I think that's a very powerful way to talk to donors and to talk to the government as well. Connect to vulnerable populations. Well, donors will normally ask you, okay, are you working with women? Are you working with youth? Are you working with waste pickers are you working? So try to connect your project to all of those, and then highlight the intended tangible outcomes. What are you actually trying to achieve? You need to know how to answer that question so that when the donor asks, it makes sense to them and to you. So one of the things that we do to persuade donors, as you can see here, is showing pictures. A donor may have never been to Tanzania and may not understand what the situation is here on the ground. So when you show pictures and then you write a little bit about the situation, about the flooding, about the clogging of drainage canals and all of that, then if a donor knows that this is supposed to be a river where this person is standing, it makes it easier to understand the reality on the ground. And we do a lot of pictures. As you can see, we document all the time so that we have a lot of pictures that donors can relate to. Another thing about persuading donors that we do is like show your strategy. In our case, we have a theory of change that we have developed that is all based on the zero waste model that are implementing. And so we have a full document about that. This is just one piece of it that shows our assumptions and shows also the areas of focus for Nipe Fagio. So when you can actually convey your strategy, you bring the donor closer to you. When you think about persuading everyone, so then again talking about donors, about governments, about everyone, I'll say it again, align social and environmental benefits. I will say that several times throughout this presentation because I think that that's one of the main things, the most important things about zero waste models in general is the opportunity to do that, to align social and environmental benefits and make sure that needs to be said. You know, you need to tell that to government, you need to tell that to your donor because that's really important and not many, not many systems do that. We also talk a lot about community enterprises, cooperatives, basically how do you bring vulnerable populations closer to the model and then they can access income and employment through the system that you are implementing. Both donors and government care a lot about that. We talk about recycling, so recycling coordination with recyclers associations, waste pickers movements. Recycling is always something that people will ask. Every time they're presenting about our zero waste, people will ask that question about recycling. And although I think by now we know that recycling doesn't solve all problems, it's still an important thing to consider. And it is still a source of income for the social enterprises that I mentioned above. So we also talk about that. Something else that we talk a lot about is how the zero waste adapts to local reality. So if you make it community-led, that's a big benefit of the zero waste model because then it becomes more replicable. It becomes more, it can actually shape to different areas, to different countries, to different communities. And it's I think both everyone that came before me has done a great job at highlighting that it's inexpensive in comparison to infrastructure-based waste management solutions. Everyone likes to save money. Communities like to save money. Donors like to save money. Government likes to save money. So showing the difference in costs for the zero waste model, and in our case, is a completely decentralized, so almost completely. We are hoping to manage 80% of the waste locally. So that is a huge saving cost. If you remember that map that I showed about how much it costs to actually take these to the dump site. Fosters awareness raising and behavior change. That's also something that people have shown before me. So that's important. And there is a network of organizations and examples in the Global South willing to support zero waste initiatives with knowledge and experience. So you basically can learn from others, and that's very important. So we normally try to make visuals about that. So things that I have already said, but it just make a vision to show that and to make it easier for people to understand and to visualize. We also highlight things like youth unemployment, the relation. Like I normally say that in Tanzania we have two curves that grow. One is youth unemployment, and the other one is the amount of waste being produced. And so basically, when you have that, you also have an opportunity to employ the youth on working with the waste. So that's also like you draw connections that people can relate with. This is from our pilot. So we did a pilot last year and we have some very cool results from that pilot. And for me, the most important result and the coolest one is that people here tend to think that people are not going to do segregation at source in Tanzania, that you cannot convince people to do so. And in our pilot, 86% of the people did it. So when you have a result like that, it's very important that you highlight it and you talk about it. So I recommend that anyone wanting to start a zero waste model, or a zero waste system, starts with a pilot, because that helps you coming up with some tangible results that you can show with people, show to people. Then thinking about estimating costs, there are costs that you need to research. So research cooperative regulations, because that helps you with tax exemptions, I believe in most countries, and has other benefits. Estimate a fair wage for waste collectors. We, in our case, base that on the minimum wage, usual wage, and possible revenue. I always recommend that when you are estimating your revenue from the system, for selling recyclables, for composting, all of that, that you underestimate that revenue, because from my experience, everything that you estimate, normally we estimate too much. And then transportation costs to the dump and landfill for the residual waste. That's another big important question to think is about, okay, we have a decentralized system, but even the 20% of the waste that we need to take to the dump site, in our case, we need to pay that transportation. So how much that costs? And then know how much people pay for waste collection currently. From our experience, despite 70% of the people in Dar es Salaam not having access to waste collection, that's the formal waste collection, everyone pays something for waste collection. They pay the kids in the neighborhood to take their waste and dump somewhere. They always pay someone to take the waste away from their houses, even if that away is just a couple blocks away. So how much do people currently pay? And can you try to keep that range and just use that money better? There are other costs that you need to consider, again, transporting to dump in the landfill, the wages of the collectors, the collection material, so hand carts or bags, whatever it is that are going to use to collect the waste, the materials recovery facility itself, both building it and then operating it. Education of the households, as Miko has showed in his presentation, is another cost that is a very important one to consider. And then there is the cost for money collection when they're collecting fees. So also you need to consider all those costs when thinking about your model. Sorry. And then accessing data. For us, the way that we access data to try to get some of this information that we need, we do community surveys. We also have contacts with the government, so involve government from the very beginning. As Satyarupa has mentioned, there is World Bank, GIZ, DFID, embassies, development agencies. There are so many organizations producing reports on waste management, so try to get as many reports as you can and learn from those and see what data you can use. And then my tip is use the data to prove your model and highlight the problem that you are solving and how you are solving that problem. I think that that's extremely important. Funding opportunities. Sorry, again. Funding opportunities. Collection fees at the local level. So we need to collect fees from the households. That's one of the ways to finance the system. And as I said, if people are already paying something, let's try to keep what they are paying or to keep the fees close to what they are currently paying. Local companies, not always easy to get the local companies to finance you long term, but for the pilot, sometimes that's possible. Embassies, the same, especially for the piloting. And then grants and foundations, that way you can actually finance a longer term modeling. And my tip on this one is make sure that you network and then you make your social media active, because that's going to give people something to see about the work that you are doing. You can talk about it, and that helps you reaching the people that you need to reach. And then my final tips, especially when you think about waste management, especially if you're thinking about low-income communities, there is something very powerful about going to a community that has been underserviced for pretty much everything, from education, health to waste, and then go there and care about the waste that they are generating. There is a connection that is very powerful there. So I'm going to say, see challenges and as opportunities. When you go to a low-income community several times, all that you can see are the problems that are there. Many of these problems are actually opportunities. For us, for example, the fact that some of these communities have no waste collection system is a great opportunity, because we don't actually need to remove a waste collector from the picture. That waste collector is not there. So it's easier for us to implement without having to fight a waste collector that is already in place, for example. It takes time. So when you think about your model, keep it long term. Don't think that you'll be able, at least for us here, it takes a long time to be able to establish and to get it going. So think long term. And don't promise to your donor that you have results very quickly, because it will probably take some time. Juggle as many balls at the same time as you can, because as I said, everything takes time. So the more you can do simultaneously, the more things move. Keep the dialogue going with the funders and with the government. So make sure that you keep everyone updated on how things are going, how things are moving. I think that that's extremely, extremely important. And that's it from me right now. Thank you. That is my phone number and email if anyone would like to talk about this more.
All right. Thanks, Anna, for this insightful presentation about your work in Dar es Salaam. Now we go on to the question and answer, or if you indulge me to at least spend maybe 5 more minutes just to ask questions from our panelists, if that's okay. Yeah, so for this session, I'd like to, in a way, paraphrase one of the questions from Macarena. So the question is, what is the hardest part in waste? Maybe if I would paraphrase it, what's the hardest step in funding or investing in zero waste? And Satyarupa, would you like to go first, and then we can also Lina or Anna ask this question.
Sure, Miko. So I think the biggest challenge was really to make a very compelling case. I think financing the Zero Waste Initiative followed from that. But once we started with the initiative, I think something that was challenging was to draw attention of the city government to underserved communities. So I think what Anna said earlier around not forgetting that if we really need to focus on underserved communities and those who are already marginalized, not just because you know that it's a good thing to do, but in developing countries like India, people who live in slums, for example, constitute about 30 to 40% of Chennai's population, right? So this is a very, very big challenge in drawing the attention of the city government to communities that have been underserved in so many ways, that adding waste, you know, when they're invisible from the mindset and from the eyes of the government for one service, it basically compounds that problem. So this, I think, would be the two key challenges, but I think the latter is something that's very important, and that we as civil society activists and organizations, I think, have a greater responsibility, I think, to draw the attention of governments and funders to more meaningful engagement for local communities.
You'd like to add on that, Anna or Lina?
Yo quisiera, mira, aprovecharme de las palabras de Ana, porque quizás lo más difícil es persuadir. Es efectivamente persuadir a los tomadores de decisión que este cambio no solo es hacia un beneficio económico, sino que es un beneficio social, que mejora la vida, la calidad de vida de las personas, que es un beneficio ambiental, y muchas de los argumentos que usan para decir no, no podemos cambiar, porque ese es el fondo, ¿no? El temor al cambio, es difícil cambiar todo un sistema de gestión. El argumento es decir, las personas no van a ser capaces de hacerlo. Las personas no van a separar sus residuos. Se van a robar los contenedores. Ese es otro argumento que usan, ¿no? Y en cada uno de las experiencias que hemos tenido, nada de esos argumentos han sido reales. Las personas están encantadas con el proyecto. Siempre hay un grupo que no se quiere sumar, pero la mayor cantidad de personas, o sea, el 90%, más del 90%, efectivamente se suma, cambia hacia este nuevo sistema y se logran los buenos resultados. Así que persuadir el cambio o lograr ese cambio, sembrar esa semilla inicial en los tomadores de decisión, quizás es una de las cosas más difíciles. Hay que trabajar ahí. Bueno, me encantó la presentación de Ana, muy bien. Sí.
Gracias. I would like to add a little bit. I think I agree with everything that Lina has said and with Satyarupa has said. I think that one of the big things is just also to consider is that waste is normally a very political area. And so there are many people that are very powerful and very influential that benefit from waste mismanagement. And there is a lot of political articulation to do. And I think that that's, and someone just asked right now about how do you deal, Eileen, you asked about how do you deal with changing leadership in government. And that with the changing leadership, basically you are changing funding and all of that. That's a very good question, and that's a very big problem. So what we try to do is we try to document very well our engagements with governments. So when someone is out, there is some sort of documentation that is behind, and then we go and say, okay, this conversation has started before, please refer to this. We have this moving going on in this community right now to be able to avoid or to avoid that issue. And I think that from also another question that Magdalena has asked that is connected to this, and that's something that Lina just mentioned about the high commitment from the community. People think that communities are not able to do anything. Communities really want to not have waste in their lives. So communities can do a lot as long as you can prove to them that you are there to work with them in the long term. You know, that the solution that you are proposing is actually beneficial for the community. And that's why when I talk about our theory of change, one of our assumptions, the main one, is that when people are given a good choice, they take it. So I think we also need to believe in people. I think that's a very important thing to do.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Actually, as a follow-up to that, Satyarupa, I think the question about continuity, especially when you have leadership change every time there's an election, then the next leader might not be interested in doing zero waste, for example. So have you in a way experienced this? Maybe not just for zero waste, but maybe in other social projects that kind of you have that threat of continuity when there's change in mayors or leaders?
Yes, definitely. I think change in leadership is a big challenge that we face. Civil servants, not just politicians, actually politicians, when they've been elected as elected representatives, actually have a guaranteed tenure, right? In India, we have the opposite challenge where the executive or the bureaucracy is what changes very quickly. And they are also very, very key in the decision making. So we've had, when I work with the Chennai city government on public sanitation, convincing just a couple of bureaucrats has been very, very difficult. We've got mayor buy-in much easier than we've got civil servants actually to commit to executing a project. But that said, I think we got very lucky with a senior civil servant actually making waste one of his priority issues. So, I think sometimes it does work to our benefit as well to have the change in leadership. And I think it's very important that we are actually very poised already, to make use of this opportunity, because when it arises, just given that how quickly things change, we need to be actually very well positioned to make use of this opportunity. So I think sometimes it can work to our benefit.
All right. So yeah. So just to check on our time, maybe I'll go back to Lina. Maybe you have some final thoughts or maybe tips or recommendations for our attendees.
Mi recomendación es perseverar en este camino. Porque no hay otro, y realmente nosotros, cada proyecto, tratamos de hacer seguimiento y vemos que los impactos son reales, son beneficiosos, y cada vez encontramos más beneficios en la realización de estos proyectos. Así que es perseverar, unirnos también, trabajar en cooperación, en conjunto, y cuentan con nosotros desde ya para apoyarlos también si necesitan algún consejo sobre cómo lo hemos logrado implementar también aquí en Chile en algunas comunas, en algunas comunidades también. Un gusto, muchas gracias.
Oh, thanks, Lina. And I'm sorry, we already have a bit over the time. But on behalf of GAIA, our panelists, Lina, Anna, and Satyarupa, as well as our interpreters, Yvonne and Lucille, my colleagues who are working and behind the scenes, Ceci and Trish. Thank you for joining this webinar. So just to remind you that the guide or the fact sheet is available on our microsite. It's flashed on your screen. And if you have additional questions, feel free to send us an email. The recording of this webinar will be sent to you after this discussion, as well as the copies of the presentations. Again, thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.